Alright guys, to finish off our lesson on parabolas, this is going to be our third lesson, and it should be turned to our page that looks like this. At the bottom, it should say page 3, so you should see a little 3 down there at the bottom. Alright, so guys, pretty similar to what we were doing last time, but here's the one difference that you're going to see today. This is now in the form of y equals. It's no longer 0 equals. So we're now really looking at just the exact form of a parabola in vertex form, which we already have been looking at, which looks like this. So the one little extra challenge that comes up on this page to finish it off is, because it doesn't equal 0, I really need to keep all this information on one side of the equation the whole way through, right? And so that's what we're going to be looking at in today's process. So our goal is to take it out of standard form and put it into vertex form. And it's really going to be very similar to what we did in lesson 2. So the issue is I need this to be a perfect square. The 17 is not what we need there. So what we need there, and I'm going to squeeze it into this space right here. If that's not enough room for you, you're welcome to do this on a separate sheet of paper. Right? Otherwise, just write nice and small and neat if you want to keep it on this page. So here's what we're going to do. So the x squared and the 8x are what I want to work with. So I got my x squared plus my 8x. That's what I want to work with. I am going to separate those from my 17. So it looks like this. And I think as I write this the rest of the way down, I'm going to leave out the y equals just because I'm pretty tight on space right now, and I want to make sure it all fits in there. So the y equals is still there. I'm just not going to write it so that I can fit all this in. So as I look at this, we're going to go through that same little formula that we looked at in the previous lesson in order to complete the square. So remember, this always tells you what your c value needs to be. So if I take my 8, put it right there, 8 divided by 2 is 4, squared, tells me that I need a 16 right there in order to complete the square. Okay, so here's the one little extra issue on this. Remember, if we said I'm going to add 16 to the right side of this equation, well then I'm also adding 16 to this side of the equation. One of the things that we saw in lesson 2 is I end up bringing all this back over to this side at the end anyway, right? So what we're going to do today is we're actually going to kind of skip directly to that step. So instead of adding 16 over to here, right, because over here it would be a plus 16. But then at the end of all this, you would have to subtract 16 back to this side. So what we're going to do today, to save us some steps, let me just write this so then you can see it. Is instead of adding 16 over to here and then at the end subtracting it back over, I'm going to skip right to that step and I'm going to put a minus 16 right there. So I'm just going to keep it all on one side of the equation today. Alright, so if we simplify this, again, we're going to look at what factors would multiply to be 16 that would add to be 8. Well, we know it's going to be positive 4 and positive 4, which means my factor would be x plus 4 squared. As I simplified this guy, 17 minus 16 is a positive 1. And that's it. It's now in vertex form. I can go through my graphing process the same way that we did in our previous lesson. I can see on this that my vertex is negative 4, positive 1. So it's going to be right there. Our axis of symmetry always runs right through the middle of that, so it's going to be x equals negative 4. And I always encourage you to draw that because, remember, when we graph it, we're going to be sort of doing the mirror image of some of the points over that line. So it's important to have it. So if this is the center of my graph right here where x equals negative 4, remember, then I want to pick two numbers on one side of that so I can get some accuracy here. So since negative 4 is in the middle, I'm going to use -3 and -2 to create some other points. I'm going to go right back up into this equation and plug them in. Remember, this whole thing equals y. So as we plug x's into this, the results that I'm getting are their y values. So if I plug -3 in, -3 plus 4 is 1. Squared is still 1, plus 1. And let's do the same thing with -2. -2 plus 4 is 2. Squared would be 4, plus 1 would be 5. So I'm going to plot those 2 points. So -3, 2. And -2, 5. And so I'm now looking at the right side of my graph. I'm going to mirror those across to this side. So now I have a nice accurate curve to draw through. And that's it. That's our process today. So it's going to be very, very similar to what we did in our second lesson. The one little extra difference is this guy right here. Right? So this is a little different look within the process, but this is ultimately the stage that we wanted to get to. So as I go to this one, I'm going to do 2 more, and then I'm going to leave you the other 3 for you guys to try. So actually, I'm going to go to some of the harder ones. So I'm going to do 9 and 10 with you guys. So let's take a look at number 9. So there's 2 other things I need you guys to see on this. So as I look at number 9, we have a little bit of an issue here, right, because of that negative, right? But in the last lesson, I was able to just move all this to the other side because it equaled 0. Well, it doesn't equal 0 today, it equals y. So I have to work with it on the side where it already is. Okay, so I'm going to start out the same way I did on the last one. I'm going to isolate those first 2 terms. So I'm going to isolate my -x squared and my 10x and separate out that 31. So I haven't really done any math yet. All I did was throw in some parentheses around my first 2 terms. So when I go through this process, the issue on this is you cannot complete the square if this is not a positive 1 sitting in that spot. So what we're going to have to do is, right now there's a -1 sitting right there. So what we're going to have to do is we're going to have to factor out -1 from those 2 terms. So I'm going to take out my -1. Well, what would that leave me with if I divide out a -1 from each of those 2 terms? Well, if I divide this by -1, he is now positive, which is what we were trying to do. Sorry, let me readjust here for a minute. There we go. All right, so we divided out the -1 from him, which made him positive. If I divide this by -1, it becomes a negative 10x. And now we have this look right here. All right, so all we really did was just say, well, this needs to equal a positive in order for me to go through completing the square. Okay, so in order for this to be positive, I had to divide out the greatest common factor of -1. Right, so I'm just dividing that out here so that now this fits the model that I need in order to complete the square. So if you're ever going to complete the square, you can't have a number, any number in front of x squared other than +1. Right, and so we'll deal with that again on this side when we get there. So as I look at the rest of this, I now need to figure out, okay, what do I have to add to this in order to complete the square? So we're back to let me just rewrite this. I'm going to leave myself a little space. All right, so remember we take our b value, we divide it by 2, so it becomes -5 squared is +25. All right, so that's what just got added to my equation to complete the square. So here's the tricky part today. This is kind of the one extra step that we're really throwing in today. Other than, I guess there's two extra steps. So this was definitely something new today, but what I'm about to do right now is also new. So remember, what you're seeing on this right now is y equaling all this stuff. So whatever you do to the right side, you also have to do to the left side to keep it balanced, right? So what did we really just add to the right side of this equation? And be careful, because most people are probably going to say, well, I just added 25, right? But here's what we have to be careful on. This is something you have to be really focused on and take into account through in this process is, remember, this belongs to everything in parentheses, right? So I really didn't just add a positive 25 to this. I really just added negative 25, because this is negative 1 times all this information. So what we really just added to this equation was negative 25. So if I'm going to add negative 25 to the right side of this equation, then I also have to add negative 25 to the left side of this equation. But the one step we're trying to skip right now is trying to write the same information a bunch of different times. So instead of putting minus 25 over here, and then at the end adding it to the other side, let's just do that right now. So instead of putting minus 25 right there, we're going to put a positive 25 right here. And we're saving a step that way, because at the end of all this, I need y by itself. Right? I want all my information on one side. So let's do a little cleanup here. Hopefully I'm not running into my graph. We'll see how this goes. So I got the negative 1 out front, which you don't have to put negative 1. You could just put a negative symbol, but I just like putting the negative 1 there. I think it's a little more clear. This now is a perfect square that needs factored. So what are two numbers that multiply to be 25 that add to be negative 10? And we know that would be negative 5 times negative 5, which we can write as x minus 5 squared. Right here I have negative 31 plus 25, which is negative 6. And that's it. So that is now in vertex form. Okay, so let's look at this one. Again, let's identify the vertex, which is positive 5, negative 6. So 5, negative 6 is going to put me right there. Our axis of symmetry would be x equals 5. Goes right down the middle of our graph. There's our axis of symmetry. And for accuracy, remember, I need 2 more points for accuracy here. So I want to pick 2 numbers that are on one side of that red line. So right now we're centered at 5. So I'm going to use numbers like 4 and 3 to get some other points. So we're going to plug those in for x. So I'm going to work with my finished equation that looks like this. I could plug them in here as well. That would work and get me the same answers. But I'm going to work with the one that's in vertex form, which looks like this. So if I took my 4 and put it in for x, 4 minus 5 is negative 1. Negative 1 squared is positive 1. Times negative 1 is now negative 1 minus 6. So careful on a lot of algebra going on in there, so make sure we're doing these, getting the correct numbers here. You'll know if you don't, probably, because it won't look like the U shape that we expect it to be. If I plug a 3 in for x, so I know 3 minus 5 is negative 2. Negative 2 squared is 4. Times negative 1 is negative 4 minus 6. All right, so this one's really going to kind of go off my grid here, so we'll get what we can, though. So 4, negative 7 would go right there, and I know he's going to mirror over to here. If I did 3, negative 10, it would be down here somewhere, so we'll just kind of do our best. And here's the mirror on the other side. So if you get some numbers that go way off your graph today, we'll just try to estimate the curve as best as we can. Not all the numbers we come up with may fit on these grids, so just do your best. All right, let me go through one more with you. All right, so let's look at this one. Again, I got my y equals. This number is a bit of a problem because I can't complete the square with him sitting there. So similar to what we did on the last one, I'm just going to start by isolating my first two terms. So I kind of want to show, and really this is for my own personal benefit visually, is I need to focus in on just those two terms to complete the square. We're going to remove him and keep him out of the way during these first couple steps. So I can't complete the square on this if I got a number sitting here. Right? This has to be positive 1, which means I need to divide out the 2 that is sitting there. So I'm going to take that 2 and divide it out. So that would now become x squared. That would now become 8. Now I can complete the square and figure out my correct c value. Let me rewrite this, but give myself some space to complete my square. All right, so what does our c value need to be? Well, remember, if you take your 8 and we plug it into that little formula that we have for figuring out c, so if you take this and divide it by 2, you get 4. 4 squared is 16. All right, here's one of our other new step for today. What did we really just add to the right side of this equation? So remember, this 2 belongs to everything in parentheses. So this is 2 times all of this. So what did we really just add? I just added 2 times 16. So I just added 32 to the right side of this equation. So what needs to come over here? So if I just added 32 to this, remember what we looked at in our previous lesson, if I add 32 to the right, then I also have to add 32 to the left. But at the end of all this, I'm going to have to subtract that 32 over to here. So we're going to skip that step and just say minus 32 right now, so I don't have to do it later. All right, let's do some cleanup. This needs factored. Numbers that multiply to be 16 that add to be 8 would have to be positive 4, so this is x plus 4 squared. Those guys just come out to be negative 2. And we are in vertex form. We can see our vertex is negative 4, negative 2. Let's plot that. I can see my axis of symmetry runs right through negative 4. So x equals negative 4 is the axis of symmetry. I want to pick 2 other numbers on one side of that red line. So I'm going to use negative 3, negative 2. And plug them into this guy. So if I put negative 3 right there, negative 3 plus 4 is 1. 1 squared is still 1. Times 2 is 2. Minus 2. So there's one of our points. Let's plug that negative 2 in. Negative 2 plus 4 is 2. 2 squared is 4. Times this is 8. Minus 2 is 6. So if I plot those points, I got negative 3, 0. I got negative 2, 6. So I'm now looking at the right side of my parabola. I'm going to mirror those to the left to get the left side. And that's it. So guys, your assignment for today will be to do the remaining problems on this page. So there's 3 more for you guys to do. Make sure that you're clearly showing this process for each one, including coming up with some extra points so that these graphs are nice and accurate. But that's all we got for parabolas.